Captain O'Brien rolled his shoulders, feeling the weight of the past 3 months of combat settling into his bones. The IRS Titanus had been through more than its fair share of engagements, and every crew member aboard was running on fumes and stims. The order to stand down for a full 72 hours at Solaris Bastion had come as a surprise, especially with the unresolved situation regarding their VIP guest still hanging over their heads. Navigation reports were on final approach to docking Base 17, Vorda announced from her station. The Khazari female's six-finger hands danced across the controls with practiced ease, her violet eyes reflecting the glow of the console. O'Brien nodded, watching as the massive space station grew larger in the view screen. Solaris Bastion was a marvel of Terran engineering, a 12-kilometer spinning habitat that served as the forward command center for this sector of contested space. Even from this distance, he could make out the gleaming hull plating that had earned it the nickname the Jewel of the Front. Inform the crew they'll have liberty once we've completed docking procedures, O'Brien said, his voice carrying that unmistakable edge of command that had kept them all alive through the Proxima campaign. Standard rotation for skeleton crew. Already drafted the schedule, Captain, Vorda replied with that subtle lift of her cranial ridges that O'Brien had come to recognize as her version of a smile. 3 years serving with the Terran fleet had not completely erased her alien mannerisms, but she had proven herself a dozen times over. Still, O'Brien noticed how some of the newer crew members watched her with wary eyes when they thought no one was looking. A flashing red indicator light pulsed briefly on his command console, the third time this week. Engineering had assured him it was nothing, just a sensor calibration issue, but something about it gnawed at O'Brien's instincts. Sergeant Trisco entered the bridge, standing at attention briefly before approaching. The stocky NCO had an uncanny ability to survive situations that killed everyone around him. The crew had taken to calling him lucky, though the haunted look that sometimes passed over his features suggested otherwise. Preparations complete, Captain. The crew is eager for some downtime, Trisco reported. His voice betrayed his own exhaustion, though his posture remained impeccable. They've earned it, O'Brien replied. You included, Sergeant. Trisco's weathered face broke into a rare smile. With all due respect, sir, I'll believe it when I'm holding a glass of Highland whiskey at the officer's lounge. The ship shuddered slightly as the docking clamps engaged and the final landing sequence initiated. O'Brien's personal comm unit vibrated against his wrist. The message was short, encrypted under Commander Wolf's personal authorization. Asterisk, need to discuss Proxima findings. Meet me at officer's quarters, level 4, room 327, 2,100 hours. Z asterisk. O'Brien felt a flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with military protocol. Commander Zena Wolf had been more than just his superior officer for the past year, though they maintained strict professionalism while on duty. Their relationship was an open secret among the senior staff, but neither allowed it to interfere with their responsibilities, promoting everything from custom combat armor modifications to authentic Terran coffee. The air carried hints of food from various worlds, the sweet tang of Andorian spice rolls mingling with the savory aroma of traditional Earth cuisine. Quite a sight, isn't it? Vorda remarked, coming to stand beside him. Despite her attempts to blend in, her distinctive violet skin and ridgeline features drew curious glances from passers-by. I never get used to the scale of these Terran stations. Humans compensate for their fragility with engineering, O'Brien replied with a wry smile. We build big because we're small. Vorda tilted her head slightly. That's oddly philosophical, Captain. 3 months on combat rations will do that to you, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. I need to check in with station security before meeting Commander Wolf. Can you handle the supply requisitions? Already scheduled for 0800 tomorrow, Vorda confirmed. I'll make sure our fuel cells are topped off and the damage to the port stabilizers is properly assessed. O'Brien nodded, appreciating her efficiency. Good. I'll see you at the officer's briefing at 0900. As Vorda departed, Sergeant Trisco appeared at O'Brien's side, having overseen the disembarkation of the crew. Permission to speak freely, sir? Trisco asked, his voice lowered. Always, Sergeant. Trisco gestured subtly toward a group of station security officers watching them from across the concourse. Not everyone's happy to see us. Word is there's been some tension between the Joint Command and certain factions within the station's permanent staff. O'Brien kept his expression neutral. Anything specific I should be concerned about? Nothing concrete, Trisco admitted. Just whispers. Some folks think the Alliance is getting too cozy with certain alien species. Others are saying there might be saboteurs on board, sympathetic to the hegemony. A chill ran through O'Brien's spine. The hegemony had been surprisingly quiet since the Proxima campaign ended. Too quiet. Keep your ear to the ground, Sergeant. Discreetly. Always do, sir. As Trisco moved off to join some of the crew heading for the enlisted quarters, O'Brien's comm unit chimed with an incoming message. It wasn't from Commander Wolf as he'd expected, but from Engineering Control. Asterisk, secondary reactor temperature, now 5% above normal parameters. Automated cooling systems engaging. Technicians investigating. Chief Engineer Kossoff, asterisk. O'Brien frowned, watching as the bustling crowd continued their activities, blissfully unaware of the potential danger lurking in the station's core. 5% wasn't alarming yet, but the rate of increase was concerning. He tapped his comm unit, sending a quick query to the station's information system. The response came back almost immediately. Asterisk, secondary reactor serves as backup power for critical station systems, including life support, defense grids, and command communications. Primary reactor operating at normal capacity. No scheduled maintenance for secondary reactor during current cycle. Asterisk, O'Brien's military instincts, honed by years of combat and near-death experiences, began to prickle. Something wasn't right. The timing was too convenient. A mysterious reactor anomaly, just as his ship docked with its cargo of sensitive intelligence from the Proxima campaign. He altered his course toward the central command hub. The meeting with Zuna would have to wait. First, he needed to understand what was happening in the heart of Solaris Bastion. The officers' lounge on Deck 7 buzzed with the sound of conversation and laughter. The space was designed to impress, with floor-to-ceiling viewports offering a spectacular panorama of the surrounding star system. Elegant lighting cast a warm glow over the polished surfaces, while soft ambient music played underneath the chatter. Commander Zuna Wolf stood near one of the viewports, a glass of dark amber liquid in her hand. Unlike many of the officers who had changed into dress uniforms or casual clothes, she remained in her combat utility uniform, the only concession to relaxation being the undone top button at her collar. Her short-cropped hair, regulation cut, but with a distinctive silver streak through the black, caught the light as she turned to scan the room. When her eyes met O'Brien's, a subtle, softening crossed her features, a look reserved only for him. She maintained her professional demeanor as he approached, but the slight tilt of her lips spoke volumes. "Captain," she greeted him formally. "Glad to see the Titanus made it back in one piece." "Mostly one piece," O'Brien replied, accepting the drink she offered him. "Port stabilizers took a beating on our exit from the Orion Nebula." Zuna nodded, her eyes conveying that this conversation was for any listening ears. "Walk with me? I'd like to hear about the Nebula crossing in detail." They moved away from the crowded center of the lounge, finding a quiet corner where the ambient noise would mask their conversation. As they settled into the low, comfortable seats, Zuna's professional mask slipped just slightly. "I missed you," she said, her voice low. 3 months is too damn long." O'Brien allowed himself a genuine smile. The Proxima campaign wasn't exactly a pleasure cruise. "How have things been here?" "Tense," Zuna admitted, taking a sip of her drink. "The Alliance intelligence officers have been on edge since we received your transmission about the VIP. Speaking of which, did you bring the data?" O'Brien nodded, tapping his uniform pocket where a secure data chip rested. "Complete transcript of the interrogation." Our guest was surprisingly forthcoming about hegemony fleet movements once we convinced him it was in his best interest. "Good," Zuna said, her expression turning serious. "Because something doesn't add up. We've had unusual activity in several sectors mentioned in your preliminary report. And now, the reactor temperature anomaly. O'Brien finished for her. Zuna's eyebrows rose slightly. You've heard already? I received an alert just after docking. 5% above normal and rising. Zuna leaned closer, her voice dropping further. There's more. Security found evidence of unauthorized access to the environmental control systems 3 days ago. Nothing was obviously tampered with, but the access logs were wiped clean. Professional job. O'Brien felt the familiar tightness in his chest that preceded combat. Sabotage. That's the working theory. We've increased security rotations, but whoever did this knew the systems intimately. An inside job, O'Brien concluded grimly. Possibly, Zuna agreed. And the timing, right when the Titanus returns with actionable intelligence, is too convenient to be coincidence. O'Brien took a long swallow of his drink, savoring the burn. So much for a 72-hour reprieve. Zuna's hand briefly touched his, a fleeting gesture of connection. I'd hoped to spend at least a little of that time not discussing military matters. So had I, O'Brien said, allowing his fingers to brush against hers before withdrawing. But if there's a threat to this station, we deal with it, Zuna finished firmly. Duty first. Always. Across the station in the recreation sector, Vorda found herself wandering through a marketplace designed to mimic an old Earth bazaar. Though she had read extensively about Terran culture before joining their fleet, experiencing it firsthand still fascinated her. Vendors called out from stalls selling everything from handcrafted jewelry to exotic foodstuffs from dozens of worlds. She paused at a display of ornate daggers, her professional interest piqued by their craftsmanship. As a tactical officer, she appreciated well-made weapons, even ceremonial ones. Wouldn't have pegged you for a blade enthusiast, a voice said from behind her. Vorta turned to find Sergeant Trisco standing there, his broad frame relaxed but his eyes alert as always. On my world, the giving of blades is a sacred exchange, she explained. It symbolizes the entrusting of one's safety to another. Trisco nodded thoughtfully. Not so different from some Earth cultures. As they moved away from the stall, Vorta noticed a group of officers watching them from across the market. Their eyes followed her with undisguised suspicion as she heard one of them mutter something about Xeno sympathizers. Trisco noticed as well, his posture subtly shifting to a more defensive stance. Ignore them, he advised quietly. Some folks haven't caught up with the reality that the Alliance needs all the allies it can get. I'm accustomed to such reactions, Vorta said calmly, though I had hoped that 3 years of service might have earned more trust. For what it's worth, Trisco said with a wry smile, you saved my hide on Proxima 4. That counts for something in my book. Their conversation was interrupted by a station-wide announcement. Asterisk, attention, all personnel. Engineering teams are performing routine maintenance on environmental systems. Some areas may experience temporary temperature fluctuations. This is not cause for concern. Repeat, this is not cause for concern. Asterisk, Trisco and Vorta exchanged a knowing glance. When they say it's not a cause for concern twice. Trisco began. It is definitely a cause for concern, Vorta finished. They were about to continue their conversation when one of the officers who had been watching them approached, his face flushed with what might have been alcohol or anger. Sergeant, the man acknowledged Trisco with a curt nod before turning his attention to Vorta. Interesting company you keep. Thought the Khazari were fighting on the other side not too long ago. Trisco stepped slightly forward, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel. Lieutenant Commander Reeves, isn't it? Vorta is a decorated officer of the Terran fleet. She's earned her place. Reeves sneered. Right? Just like those Prashik colonists earned having their planet glassed by Khazari warships. Vorta remained perfectly still, though her posture tensed imperceptibly. I was not part of the hegemony forces during that conflict, Commander. I have served the Alliance loyally since defecting. Defecting. Convenient timing, that, Reeves said, his hand casually moving to rest near his sidearm. Just when the tide started turning against the hegemony. Trisco's eyes narrowed. I suggest you move along, Commander. We're all on the same side here. Are we? Reeves looked pointedly at Vorta. Some of us wonder about that, especially with strange things happening on this station lately. Before the situation could escalate further, Trisco spotted something on the floor near a maintenance hatch, a small metallic component that didn't match the station's standard hardware. With remarkable speed, he bent down to retrieve it, using the motion to defuse the confrontation. "Looks like someone dropped a non-standard coupling," he observed, examining the piece. "Strange place for it." Reeves's eyes flickered to the component, then back to Vorta. "Keep your pet alien on a tight leash, Sergeant," he muttered before turning away. Once he was out of earshot, Trisco handed the component to Vorta. "What do you make of this?" She examined it carefully, her technical training immediately recognizing it as something out of place. "This is not standard Alliance hardware. The configuration suggests hegemony manufacturing, but modified." Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. "We need to inform the captain," Trisco said grimly. "I think we just found a piece of our sabotage puzzle." Vorta nodded, her violet eyes darkening with concern. "And if this is part of a larger device, then we might have bigger problems than a few temperature fluctuations," Trisco finished, already activating his comm unit to contact O'Brien. As they moved quickly through the crowded marketplace, neither noticed the figure watching them from the shadows, who quietly spoke into a concealed communicator. They found something. Accelerate the timeline. In the heart of Solaris Bastion, deep within the engineering decks, the secondary reactor's cooling systems worked overtime as temperatures continued their steady, deliberate rise. The secure briefing room on Level 2 was Spartan but functional. O'Brien, Zuna, Vorta, and Trisco gathered around a holographic display showing schematics of the station's reactor systems. The mysterious component Trisco had found rotated slowly in a containment field at the center of the table. "Definitely hegemony tech," Zuna confirmed, examining the readouts. "But it's been modified to interface with our systems. Sophisticated work." O'Brien frowned. "How did something like this get past security?" "The station received a shipment of replacement parts 3 weeks ago," Zuna explained, pulling up the manifests. "Large shipment, processed quickly due to priority flagging. If someone knew what they were doing, they could have slipped contraband through." Vorta leaned forward, studying the component. "This is part of a thermal regulator bypass. It would allow someone to manually override the safety protocols on a reactor system without triggering immediate alarms, creating a slow boil instead of an obvious sabotage," O'Brien concluded. "By the time the automated systems recognize the severity of the problem, it could be too late," Trisco finished grimly. Zuna brought up a new schematic, this one showing the station's reactor chambers. "The secondary reactor provides backup power for all critical systems: life support, weapons, communication arrays. If it goes critical, half the station could be compromised before the emergency containment kicks in." "And the primary reactor?" O'Brien asked. "So far, no signs of tampering, but we can't be certain," Zuna replied. "I've stationed additional security personnel, but our resources are stretched thin. We have over 2,000 personnel on this station, plus nearly 500 civilian contractors. Not to mention the diplomatic contingent from the Alaxi Confederation that arrived yesterday." O'Brien's eyebrows rose. "The Alaxi are here? That wasn't in the briefing." "Last-minute development," Zuna said, her expression grim. "They're considering formal alliance with the Terran Federation. The treaty signing is scheduled for tomorrow." "Perfect timing for sabotage," Vorta observed. "Disrupting such a significant diplomatic event would be a major coup for the hegemony." O'Brien studied the schematics intently. "We need to access the reactor monitoring systems directly. The saboteurs might have compromised the standard reporting channels." "That won't be easy," Zuna warned. "Access to the reactor control rooms is heavily restricted. We need authorization from the station commander, and without concrete evidence beyond this single component, we make our own access," O'Brien decided. "Vorta, you and I will use your engineering credentials to get into the maintenance tunnels near reactor control. Trisco, coordinate with Commander Wolf to establish a secure communication channel that bypasses the main system." And if we find evidence of sabotage, Vorta asked, then we move to neutralize the threat immediately, O'Brien said firmly. Official channels can catch up later. Zuna nodded, her expression a mixture of professional approval and personal concern. I'll work on getting us official authorization in parallel. If things go sideways, you'll need the backup. The station's internal communications system chimed, followed by another announcement. Asterisk, attention, all personnel. Environmental control reports minor system adjustments are ongoing. Temperature regulation may fluctuate in sections 12 through 27. Maintenance teams are addressing the issue. Asterisk, sections 12 through 27, Trisco noted. That's nearly a third of the habitation ring. They're expanding the affected area, Vorta observed. Whatever they're doing, it's spreading. O'Brien stood, his decision made. We move now. Commander Wolf, see what you can learn about Lieutenant Commander Reeves and any associates he might have on station. His confrontation with Vorta and Trisco feels like more than simple xenophobia. Agreed, Zuna said, already inputting commands into her secure terminal. Be careful, Captain. If there are saboteurs on board, they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets in their way. O'Brien nodded grimly. Neither will we. As they prepared to leave, the temperature in the briefing room noticeably increased by several degrees. The environmental controls were failing faster than reported. Time was running out. The maintenance access tunnels ran throughout Solaris Bastion like veins through a living organism, allowing engineers and technicians to reach critical systems without disrupting the day-to-day operations of the station. Normally brightly lit and climate-controlled, the tunnels in Section 18 were now dim and uncomfortably warm. O'Brien and Vorta moved quietly through the narrow passageway, their movements precise and efficient. Years of working together had created an unspoken understanding between them. Environmental controls are completely offline in this section, Vorta reported, checking her handheld scanner. Temperature is 8 degrees above normal and rising. O'Brien wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. Deliberately disabled or collateral damage from the main sabotage effort. Impossible to determine without accessing the central monitoring station, Vorta replied. She paused at a junction, consulting the schematics they had downloaded. Reactor control access should be 200 meters ahead, through the cooling regulation chamber. Their comm units crackled with Trisco's voice. Captain, we've identified at least 3 individuals working with Reeves. Station security has them under surveillance, but they're being careful not to tip our hand yet. Any identification on who they're working for? O'Brien asked, keeping his voice low. Not confirmed, but Commander Wolf found encrypted communications matching hegemony protocols. They're using an old cipher the Alliance cracked months ago, almost like they want us to know who's behind this. O'Brien frowned. The hegemony was many things, but sloppy wasn't one of them. Using outdated encryption felt wrong, unless it was intentional misdirection. Keep digging, he instructed, and maintain regular check-ins. If we go silent for more than 15 minutes, assume we've been compromised. Understood, sir. Trisco acknowledged before the line went quiet. They continued through the increasingly warm tunnels, the metal walls now hot to the touch. As they approached the cooling regulation chamber, a faint hissing sound reached them, the unmistakable noise of pressurized gas escaping. Coolant leak, Vorta identified immediately, her enhanced senses detecting the subtle chemical signature. Non-toxic, but means the cooling system is failing. O'Brien drew his sidearm, or being deliberately disabled. They reached a heavy-pressure door marked Cooling Regulation. Authorized personnel only. The access panel beside it glowed red, indicating a lockdown. Can you bypass it? O'Brien asked. Vorta examined the panel with practiced eyes. Yes, but it will trigger an alert in main engineering. Do it. At this point, speed matters more than stealth. Vorta nodded and connected her technical interface to the access panel. Her fingers moved rapidly across the surface as she worked to override the security protocols. After 30 seconds of intense concentration, the panel flashed green and the pressure door hissed open. Beyond lay the cooling regulation chamber, a vast space filled with massive pumps, exchange units, and control stations. The room should have been bustling with engineers, but it was eerily empty. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow, and warning indicators flashed on nearly every console. "Where is everyone?" O'Brien muttered, moving carefully into the chamber, his weapon ready. The answer came in the form of a body slumped behind one of the cooling units, a technician in Alliance engineering garb, a small puncture wound at the base of his skull. "Precision kill," Vorda observed, examining the wound without touching the body. "Professional work. No blood spray, minimal evidence." O'Brien's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the chamber. "Check for survivors. I'll secure the control station." They split up, moving efficiently through the massive space. O'Brien approached the main control console, noting with growing alarm that the reactor temperature indicators were now well into the yellow warning zone. The automated safety systems had been disabled, and manual overrides were in place to prevent emergency shutdown. "Vorda," he called quietly. "Found anything?" "Two more bodies," she reported from across the chamber. "Same method. They've been dead for at least 3 hours." O'Brien accessed the console, using his command codes to try to restore the safety protocols. The system rejected his attempts, flashing a message. "Command Override Alpha, 7I in effect." "They've locked us out with high-level command authorization," he said grimly. Vorda joined him at the console, studying the readouts. "The core temperature is approaching critical levels. Without intervention, we have perhaps 40 minutes before irreversible damage occurs." O'Brien's comm unit activated, Zuna's voice coming through with urgency. "Captain, we've got a situation. Station security just apprehended Reeves trying to access the command center. He had falsified authorization codes and a concealed weapon." "Is he talking?" "Not yet, but his accomplices have scattered. We believe at least 2 are still unaccounted for." O'Brien looked at the complex systems surrounding them. "We found their handiwork. They've overridden the safety protocols on the secondary reactor. We need to manually reset the system, but we're locked out of the controls." There was a brief pause before Zuna replied, her voice deadly serious. "A full reactor meltdown would be catastrophic, O'Brien. We're talking massive casualties, possible structural failure of the entire station. Not to mention what it would do to the Alliance negotiations with the Alaxi." "I'm aware," O'Brien said grimly. "We need to access the primary cooling control valve. It should be somewhere in this chamber." "East quadrant," Vorda supplied, already moving in that direction. "If we can manually increase coolant flow, it might buy us enough time to restore the automated systems." As they moved toward the valve controls, the main lights in the chamber suddenly went out, leaving only the red emergency lighting. A moment later, a new alarm began to sound, a pulsing, urgent tone that every Alliance officer recognized with dread. "Intruder alert," O'Brien said, moving to cover beside a large coolant tank. "Someone's coming." The pressure door they had entered through slid open, and 3 figures entered the chamber. They wore standard engineering uniforms, but their movements betrayed military training. Each carried a compact pulse rifle, not standard issue for station personnel. "Spread out," the leader ordered in a hushed voice. "Confirm the override is still in place, then set the charges. We have 15 minutes to get to the extraction point." O'Brien and Vorda exchanged a glance. The situation had just escalated from sabotage to something far worse. These weren't just trying to damage the station. They were planning to destroy it entirely. With practiced coordination, O'Brien signaled Vorda to flank the intruders while he created a distraction. He aimed carefully at a pressure gauge near the infiltrators and fired a single shot. The gauge exploded in a shower of sparks and escaping gas, momentarily disorienting the saboteurs. O'Brien used the confusion to call out, "Alliance security, drop your weapons." Instead of complying, the 3 infiltrators immediately took cover and returned fire, pulse rounds sizzling through the air and impacting against the equipment around O'Brien. He ducked lower, using the massive coolant tanks as shelter. Across the chamber, Vorda had silently maneuvered behind the intruders. Within human speed, she launched herself at the rearmost figure, her combat knife finding the vulnerable gap in his body armor. The man went down without a sound. The firefight intensified as the remaining two saboteurs realized they were caught in a crossfire. One of them shouted into his comm unit, "Perimeter compromised. Accelerate timeline." O'Brien heard the words with a chill of realization. There were more of them, and whatever they had planned was now being rushed. He had to end this. Quickly. "Vorta," he called out. The cooling valve. Understanding immediately, Vorta disengaged from the fight and sprinted toward the main control valve at the far end of the chamber. The saboteurs, realizing her intent, redirected their fire toward her. O'Brien seized the opportunity, breaking from cover and charging the closest attacker. His first shot caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second struck him in the face, dropping him permanently. The leader of the infiltration team turned to track O'Brien, but too late. O'Brien tackled him to the ground, the impact sending the man's weapon skittering across the floor. They grappled brutally, each fighting with the desperate intensity of those who knew the stakes. "You're too late," the saboteur snarled, his accent marking him as from the outer colonies, likely a mercenary rather than a true hegemony loyalist. "The sequence is locked in. This station burns." O'Brien slammed his elbow into the man's throat. "Who hired you?" The saboteur grinned through bloodied teeth. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Before O'Brien could press further, the man bit down hard on something in his mouth. His eyes widened momentarily, then glazed over as a fast-acting poison took effect. "Suicide capsule," O'Brien muttered grimly, checking for a pulse and finding none. These weren't just mercenaries, they were fanatics. Across the chamber, Vorta had reached the main cooling valve. "Captain," she called, "the valve control is fused. I cannot open it manually." O'Brien rushed to join her, examining the massive control wheel that should have allowed them to increase coolant flow to the reactor. The mechanism had been deliberately sabotaged, the metal components partially melted to prevent rotation. "We need to break it free," O'Brien decided, looking around for something they could use as leverage. His comm unit activated, Zuna's voice urgent. "O'Brien, what's your status?" "Reactor temperatures are approaching critical levels. The automated systems are showing total failure of cooling regulation. We've engaged hostiles and neutralized them, but they've sabotaged the manual override," O'Brien reported. "We need to force the cooling valve open, but it's been fused." Trisco's voice joined the channel. "Captain, I'm near your position with a security team. We have breaching equipment. Get here now," O'Brien ordered, "and bring coolant suits if you can find them. The temperature in here is becoming dangerous." As if to emphasize his point, a warning klaxon began to sound throughout the station, followed by an automated announcement. "Warning, reactor instability detected. All non-essential personnel evacuate sectors 12 through 35 immediately." This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Vorta examined the control panel next to the valve. "If we cannot open the valve conventionally, perhaps we can bypass the control system entirely." "Ow!" O'Brien asked, wiping sweat from his eyes as the chamber temperature continued to rise. "The primary coolant lines run directly beneath this flooring," Vorta explained, pointing to a maintenance hatch. "If we can access them directly, we might be able to manually redirect the flow." O'Brien immediately understood. "We create our own bypass." Good thinking. Together, they wrenched open the maintenance hatch, revealing a maze of pipes and conduits. The heat rising from below was intense, nearly unbearable. "There," Vorta pointed to a massive blue pipe. "That's the main coolant feed." O'Brien's comm unit chimed again. "Captain," Zuna's voice was tense. "Reactor temperature now at 87% of critical. You have less than 15 minutes before cascade failure becomes inevitable." "Understood," O'Brien replied grimly. "We're working on it." The pressure door slid open, and Trisco burst in with 3 security officers, each carrying equipment. "Captain, we got the gear." "Excellent timing, Sergeant," O'Brien said. "We need to create a bypass on the main coolant line. Have your people set up a perimeter in case there are more hostiles." Trisco nodded, distributing the equipment while directing his security team to defensive positions. He handed O'Brien and Vorta each a coolant suit, thin, reflective garments designed to protect against extreme temperatures. Put these on, he advised. The reactor chamber is registering over 50 degrees Celsius now. As they donned a protective gear, O'Brien laid out his plan. We'll need to cut into the main line and install a manual release valve. It's risky. If we miscalculate, we could make things worse. With respect, Captain, Vorta said, her voice steady despite the dangerous heat. We have no choice. The station's evacuation protocols won't evacuate everyone in time if the reactor goes critical. Trisco unfolded a portable cut. O'Brien pointed to a section of the massive coolant pipe. Here, we need a clean cut, then we'll attach the bypass valve directly. As Trisco began working on the pipe, the station shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the emergency systems faltered. What was that? One of the security officers asked, steadying himself against the console. Pressure buildup, Vorta explained, her eyes on the monitoring equipment. The reactor containment systems are beginning to fail. O'Brien's comm unit activated again. Captain, Zuna's voice was tight with tension. We got a new problem. The station's automated systems are initiating emergency protocols. Bulkheads are sealing throughout sectors 15 through 30. If you don't get out soon, you'll be trapped in there. We can't leave now, O'Brien replied, watching as Trisco's cutting tool slowly penetrated the outer shell of the coolant pipe. If this reactor goes, the entire station is lost. How much time do we have before the bulkheads seal? 7 minutes, Zuna answered, and I can't override it from here. The saboteurs locked down the command systems. The cutting tool whined as it sliced through the thick metal. Coolant vapor began to escape from the growing incision, hissing angrily as it met the superheated air. Almost through, Trisco reported, his face glistening with sweat despite the protective suit. One of the security officers monitoring the chamber entrance suddenly called out, "Movement in the corridor. Multiple hostiles approaching." O'Brien made a quick decision. Trisco, keep working. Vorta with me. We need to hold them off until the bypass is complete. Vorta nodded, drawing her sidearm and moving swiftly to a defensive position near the entrance. O'Brien took cover on the opposite side, signaling the security officers to spread out. The pressure door slid open, and pulse fire immediately lanced through the opening. O'Brien counted at least 4 distinct weapons. More saboteurs trying to ensure their plan succeeded. Return fire, he ordered. Keep them pinned in the corridor. The security team responded with disciplined bursts, forcing the attackers to take cover outside the chamber. One of them tossed a stun grenade through the doorway, but Vorta's quick reflexes allowed her to bat it back into the corridor before it detonated. Cutting complete. Trisco called from behind them. Installing bypass valve now. Another violent shudder ran through the station, stronger than the first. Warning klaxons intensified, and the automated announcement system updated its message. Critical reactor failure imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately. Emergency bulkheads sealing in 5 minutes. The firefight at the doorway continued, neither side able to gain an advantage. O'Brien realized they were running out of time, not just for the reactor, but for their escape as well. Trisco, status, he demanded, firing another burst to keep the attackers at bay. Almost there, Captain. The valve is attached, but the pressure is making it difficult to secure. O'Brien made a split-second decision. Vorta, take command here. I'm going to help Trisco. Without waiting for a response, he retreated from his position, racing back to where Trisco struggled with the massive bypass valve. The sergeant's hands were shaking with effort as he tried to tighten the final coupling against the immense pressure of the coolant system. Together, O'Brien said, gripping the wrench alongside Trisco. Even through the protective gloves, he could feel the searing heat of the metal. With their combined strength, they managed to turn the coupling another full rotation, finally securing it. Valve is set, Trisco announced. Ready to open on your command. O'Brien's comm unit crackled urgently. 2 minutes until bulkhead sealing. Zuna reported. Whatever you're going to do, do it now. At the entrance, the security team was down to one officer besides Vorta. The other two had been hit and were being dragged to safety behind cooling units. Everyone brace yourselves. O'Brien called out. Trisco, open the valve, full flow. Trisco turned the bypass valve, muscles straining with the effort. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, coolant began to flow through their improvised system. The pipes shuddered violently, threatening to tear apart at the joints. Coolant flow restored. Vorta called out, reading from a nearby status panel. Reactor temperature dropping. Stabilizing. A new sound reached them. The whine of bulkhead doors beginning their closing sequence. They had succeeded in preventing a meltdown, but now faced being trapped. Everyone out, O'Brien ordered. Move! The security officer helping his wounded comrades needed assistance. O'Brien and Trisco rushed to help, each taking one of the injured personnel, while Vorta provided covering fire at the retreating saboteurs. They raced through the corridors, the heat still oppressive, but gradually diminishing as the cooling systems began to recover. Behind them, massive bulkhead doors were descending from the ceiling, sealing off sections of the station one by one. Next intersection, Vorta called out, having memorized the evacuation route. Left turn, then straight to evacuation point Charlie. They rounded the corner just as the bulkhead behind them slammed, closed with finality. The wounded security officers were struggling to keep pace, their injuries taking a toll. Almost there, O'Brien encouraged them, supporting one officer whose leg had been hit by pulse fire. Just a little further. Ahead, another bulkhead was beginning its descent. It was going to be close. Run! Trisco shouted, surging forward with renewed energy. One by one, they slid beneath the descending door. First Vorta, then the security officers, then Trisco. O'Brien was last, diving beneath the massive metal slab as it closed. His left arm was caught momentarily, the protective suit tearing and exposing his skin to the superheated metal. Pain lanced through him as he wrenched himself free, the bulkhead slamming shut behind him. Captain! Vorta was at his side immediately, examining his injured arm. Second-degree burns, possibly third. I'll live, O'Brien grunted, rising to his feet. Let's get to the command center. His comm unit activated once more. O'Brien. Zuna's voice was filled with relief. Reactor temperatures are stabilizing. What's your status? 5 alive, 2 wounded, he reported. And we've got some saboteurs trapped on the other side of the bulkheads. They won't be going anywhere, Zuna assured him. Security teams are sweeping the sealed sections as we speak. You did it, Captain. O'Brien looked at his team. Vorta, calm and efficient as she administered emergency medical treatment to the wounded officers. Trisco, exhausted but standing tall, his uniform scorched and torn. They had prevented disaster through sheer determination and courage. We did it, he corrected Zuna. All of us. As they made their way to the command center, O'Brien couldn't help but think this was hardly the relaxing shore leave they had been promised. But then again, in this line of work, when did anything go according to plan? The medical bay of Solaris Bastion was a hive of controlled activity. Doctors and medical technicians, both human and alien, moved efficiently between beds occupied by those injured during the crisis. The attempted sabotage had resulted in 14 casualties, but miraculously, no fatalities. O'Brien sat on an examination table, gritting his teeth as a medical officer applied regenerative gel to the severe burns on his left arm. The pain was intense, but he refused the offered painkillers. He needed a clear head for what was coming next. You know, most people would take the medication, Dr. Eleanor Patel observed as she wrapped his arm in specialized bandages. The nerve damage is significant. I'll take something later, O'Brien promised. Right now, I need to think. Dr. Patel shook her head slightly, but didn't argue. She treated enough veteran officers to know when not to push. The regenerative treatment will take approximately 12 hours to restore full tissue integrity. Until then, limit movement and keep the bandage sealed. Understood, doctor. Am I clear to leave? Medically? No. Practically? I know you're going to anyway, so just try not to tear open the wound. She made a final notation in his medical file before moving on to her next patient. As O'Brien carefully pulled on a fresh uniform shirt provided by a medical assistant, Commander Wolf entered the medical bay. She moved directly to his side, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the obvious concern in her eyes. "Captain," she greeted him formally, aware of the many ears around them. "How's the arm?" "I'll have a new scar to add to the collection," he replied with a grim smile. "What's the situation?" Zuna glanced around before lowering her voice. "Security has detained 8 individuals connected to the sabotage attempt. Most are mercenaries, former military from the outer colonies. They're being interrogated now. And Reeves, still not talking, but we found something interesting in his quarters." She handed O'Brien a small data chip. "Encrypted communications going back 6 months. Our analysts are working on it, but the preliminary assessment suggests he was recruited long before he arrived on this station." O'Brien pocketed the chip. "A sleeper agent." "Exactly. And if he was placed here that long ago, this operation was in planning well before the Proxima campaign." The implications were troubling. If the hegemony had been planning this for months, what other operations might be in motion throughout Alliance territory? "The Alaxi delegation?" O'Brien asked. Shaken but committed, Zuna reported with evident relief. "Their ambassador actually expressed admiration for how quickly we contained the threat. Apparently, their culture values decisive action in crisis." "Small mercies," O'Brien muttered. He slid off the examination table, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injured arm. "I want to speak with the prisoners." "Already arranged," Zuna confirmed. "But first, there's something else you should see." They left the medical bay together, walking through corridors that still showed signs of the recent crisis. Scorch marks on walls, repair teams working on damaged systems, security personnel stationed at key junctions. The station was recovering, but the atmosphere remained tense. They found Vorta and Trisco waiting for them in a small analysis lab adjacent to the security center. Vorta stood at a workstation, examining molecular scans of material recovered from the saboteurs. "Captain," she acknowledged O'Brien with a respectful nod. "How is your injury?" "Functional," he replied simply. "What have you found?" Vorta gestured to the display. "The explosives the saboteurs were carrying. They're not hegemony standard issue, as we initially suspected. The molecular structure indicates Tantorian manufacturing." O'Brien frowned. "The Tantorians are neutral in the conflict. They've been supplying both sides with raw materials, but not weapons." "Apparently that's changed," Trisco noted grimly. "Or someone wants us to think it has." Zuna studied the analysis with narrowed eyes. "This could be significant if the hegemony has convinced the Tantorians to take a more active role. Or," O'Brien interjected, "someone is trying to drive a wedge between the Alliance and the Tantorians. Create suspicion, disrupt trade, force them to choose sides. A false flag operation," Vorta concluded. "It will be consistent with hegemony tactics we observed during the Kalidasa conflict." O'Brien nodded slowly, the pieces beginning to fit together. The sabotage attempt was never expected to succeed completely. It was meant to be discovered and traced back to the Tantorians. Disrupting the Alaxi Treaty would have been a bonus, Zuna added, but not the primary objective. Trisco leaned against the console, his expression grim. "So we're looking at a much bigger game being played." "Great. Just when I thought we might actually get that shore leave." O'Brien allowed himself a small smile at the sergeant's gallows humor. "I think 72 hours of rest might be wishful thinking at this point, Sergeant." "Captain," Vorta interrupted, her attention drawn to a new alert on her console. "Security has reported unusual findings during the interrogation of one of the mercenaries. Apparently, he's asking to speak with you specifically." O'Brien exchanged a glance with Zuna. "Which one?" "The team leader," Vorta replied. "The one who escaped the initial confrontation in the cooling chamber." "Interesting," O'Brien mused. "Arrange it. I want to know what he thinks is important enough to ask for me by name." The detention level was isolated from the main areas of the station, accessible only through heavily guarded checkpoints. O'Brien and Zuna were escorted by security detail to a Spartan interrogation room where a man sat shackled to a table. Unlike the fanatical saboteur who had taken his own life, this man had a calculating look about him. His eyes tracked O'Brien's entrance with sharp intelligence, assessing and measuring. "Captain James O'Brien," the prisoner said, his voice carrying an accent that suggested origins in the Procyon system. "Your reputation precedes you." O'Brien took the seat across from him, keeping his expression neutral. "You have me at a disadvantage." Marcus Vega, the man supplied easily. "Former Alliance Special Operations, now freelance." "A traitor," Zuna said coldly from her position by the door. Vega shrugged, the gesture limited by his restraints. "Politics change. Alliances shift. I go where the money is good." And was the money good enough to justify killing thousands of innocent people? O'Brien asked, his voice level despite the anger he felt. "That wasn't the plan," Vega replied, leaning forward slightly. "The reactor was never meant to go critical. Just enough damage to create a diplomatic incident. My employer was very specific about casualty limitations." O'Brien studied the man carefully. "And who might that employer be?" Vega smiled thinly. "That's why I asked for you. I'm willing to provide that information, but I want guarantees." "You're not in a position to negotiate," Zuna pointed out. "On the contrary, Commander Wolf," Vega replied. The use of her name clearly meant to unsettle her. "What I know is worth far more than whatever punishment you're planning to inflict." O'Brien remained silent for a moment, considering his options. Finally, he spoke. "I can recommend leniency if your information proves valuable. That's all I can offer." Vega seemed to weigh this, then nodded. Slowly. "Fair enough. You need to understand something, Captain. The hegemony isn't behind this. At least, not the hegemony you think you know." "Explain," O'Brien demanded. "There's a faction within Hegemony High Command, calling themselves Purity of Form. Hardliners who believe cooperation with other species is a corruption of humanity's destiny." Vega's expression turned serious. "They're operating independently of the official command structure, using mercenaries like me to carry out operations that the mainstream hegemony wouldn't sanction." "Splinter faction," Zuna murmured. "It would explain the inconsistencies in tactics we've been seeing." Vega nodded. "They've been planning something big, something that would make this little reactor incident look like a training exercise. That's why I want to talk to you specifically, O'Brien. You're the one who captured Admiral Tarkos during the Proxima campaign." O'Brien kept his expression carefully neutral, though internally he felt a surge of alarm. Admiral Tarkos, the VIP prisoner whose intelligence had been so valuable, was supposed to be in secure Alliance custody. "What about Tarkos?" he asked carefully. "The Purity faction wants him back," Vega stated flatly. "They've orchestrated operations across 3 sectors to create distractions and pull Alliance resources away from his transport route." O'Brien and Zuna exchanged a quick glance. This was sensitive information. The transfer of Tarkos to Alliance intelligence headquarters was classified at the highest levels. "When?" O'Brien demanded. "Today," Vega replied simply. "The operation was timed to coincide with your arrival at Solaris Bastion. They knew you'd be here, temporarily separated from the Titanus, which is carrying Tarkos in its secure containment deck." Ice formed in O'Brien's veins. The Titanus was supposed to be safely docked, undergoing maintenance while the crew enjoyed their shore leave. If what Vega was saying was true, this whole sabotage attempt, Zuna realized, it was a distraction. "Partly," Vega confirmed, "and partly to eliminate you, Captain. You're on their target list after Proxima." O'Brien stood abruptly. "I need to contact my ship immediately." "You won't reach them," Vega said with certainty. "The assault team will have already disabled communications." "Standard procedure." O'Brien turned to Zuna. "Scramble security to docking bay 17. Full tactical team." To Vega, he added, "If you're lying, I'm not." The mercenary replied calmly. "Self-preservation is a powerful motivator, Captain. The Purity faction doesn't tolerate failure, and I'd rather take my chances with Alliance justice." As O'Brien and Zuna rushed from the interrogation room, the station intercom activated once more. "Attention, all personnel. Environmental systems have been fully restored. All sections now operating at nominal temperature. Repair crews continue work in affected areas. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but a far greater one was now unfolding. Temperatures might have stabilized in the reactor core, but elsewhere they were rising to dangerous new heights. The Security Control Center adjacent to Docking Bay 17 was a hive of urgent activity. O'Brien, Zuna, Vorda, and Trisco gathered around a tactical display showing the layout of the Titanus, still firmly locked in its docking clamps. External communications from the Titanus went offline 20 minutes ago, the security chief reported. We assumed it was related to the maintenance schedule, but now we know better, O'Brien finished grimly. What's the status of the boarding party? Team is in position, the chief replied, indicating points on the display. 12 operators, fully equipped. Awaiting your orders. O'Brien studied the schematic, his military mind analyzing approach vectors and defensible positions. The secure containment deck is here. He pointed to a section deep within the ship. That's where they'll be holding Admiral Tarkos. If they haven't already extracted him, Zuna noted. Unlikely, Vorda interjected. Standard docking protocols require at least 30 minutes to prepare for departure. Given the timing Vega provided, they would still be on board. Trisco leaned closer to the display. So, they've neutralized the skeleton crew, secured their target, and are now preparing for extraction. Question is, how do they plan to leave? The Titanus is locked down tight. They'll have an exit strategy, O'Brien said with certainty. Possibly a smaller vessel docked to the emergency airlock on the ventral hull. Thermal scans confirm unusual activity in that section, the security chief reported, highlighting an area on the display. Definitely higher heat signatures than should be present for a maintenance cycle. O'Brien made his decision. We need to move now. Split the team. One group secures the bridge, the other heads directly for containment. Zuna, coordinate from here and be ready to lock down all external airlocks if they try to flee. What about you? Zuna asked, though she already knew the answer. I'm going in with the containment team, O'Brien stated firmly. It's my ship. Zuna's expression tightened, but she didn't argue. She understood the responsibility a captain felt toward their vessel and crew. Take Vorda and Trisco. They know the ship's layout as well as you do. The tactical team was composed of station security personnel, highly trained, but unfamiliar with the specific design of the Titanus. Having experienced crew members would be invaluable. Gear up, O'Brien ordered. We move in 5 minutes. As the others prepared, Zuna pulled O'Brien aside, her voice low. Your arm isn't healed. It'll hold, he replied simply. James, she said, using his first name for the first time since they'd reunited, be careful in there. We have unfinished business, you and I. O'Brien allowed himself a brief smile. Temperatures are rising, Commander. In more ways than one. She returned the smile, though concern still shadowed her eyes. Go get your ship back, Captain. 5 minutes later, O'Brien led his team through the main airlock connecting the station to the Titanus. They moved with disciplined silence, tactical lights illuminating the darkened corridor ahead. The ship was on emergency power, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Life signs, O'Brien whispered to the security operator carrying the scanner. Multiple readings throughout the ship, the woman replied quietly. Largest concentration on the bridge and in containment, as expected. Several unmoving signatures in the crew quarters, likely the incapacitated skeleton crew. O'Brien nodded grimly. He hoped his people were just unconscious, not dead, but he couldn't dwell on that now. Team Alpha, proceed to the bridge. Team Beta, with me to containment. The group split at the next junction, 5 operators heading toward the command deck while O'Brien led Vorda, Trisco, and 3 security personnel toward the heart of the ship. Motion ahead, Vorda warned, her enhanced senses detecting what the human operators hadn't yet registered. 2 individuals, moving away from us. Patrol, O'Brien surmised. They're being cautious. They pressed themselves against the bulkheads as 2 armed figures in unmarked combat gear passed through an intersection 30 meters ahead. Once clear, they continued their advance, moving deeper into the vessel. The ship felt wrong to O'Brien, silent and alien despite being his home for years. The absence of the usual background hum of systems and crew created an unnatural quiet that set his nerves on edge. They encountered no further resistance until they reached the access corridor leading to the containment deck. Two guards stood outside the heavy security door, alert and heavily armed. O'Brien signaled for his team to hold position while he assessed the situation. The guard were professionals, positioned with overlapping fields of fire, no obvious weaknesses in their stance or awareness. Flashbang, then suppressing fire, he whispered to the team. Vorta, you circle behind through maintenance shaft J7. The Khazari tactical officer nodded, immediately moving to a small access panel nearby. Within moments, she had disappeared into the narrow maintenance tunnel that would bring her out behind the guard's position. O'Brien counted silently, giving her time to get into position. When he reached 30, he nodded to Trisco, who pulled a flashbang grenade from his tactical vest. 3, 2, 1. Now! Trisco tossed the grenade with perfect accuracy. It detonated directly between the two guards, momentarily blinding and disorienting them. O'Brien and the security team surged forward, weapons trained on the stunned figures. Before they could fully recover, Vorta emerged from a vent behind them, disarming one with a swift strike to the wrist and pressing her weapon against the back of the other's head. Don't move, she ordered coldly. The guards, realizing they were outmaneuvered, slowly raised their hands in surrender. Secure them, O'Brien ordered as they approached the containment deck access door. It was sealed with an emergency override, standard procedure during a security breach, but an obstacle they needed to overcome quickly. I can bypass it, one of the security operators offered, already connecting a decryption device to the control panel. O'Brien shook his head. No time. He reached into his tactical vest and retrieved his command override module, a small device that interfaced directly with the ship's systems. Captain's privilege. The device connected, scanned his biometrics, and a massive door hissed open. Beyond lay a scene of controlled chaos. The containment deck, normally a sterile, orderly environment, had been transformed into a makeshift command center. Portable equipment was set up around the central containment cell, where a figure sat, strapped to a specialized transport chair. Admiral Tarkos, one of the hegemony's most brilliant strategic minds and now, apparently, the target of a high-risk extraction operation. 4 armed operatives spun to face the intruders, weapons raised. Behind them, a man in what appeared to be a medical uniform was preparing Tarkos for transport. Alliance security, O'Brien announced, his weapon steady. Drop your weapons. Instead of complying, the operatives opened fire, forcing O'Brien's team to take cover behind containment equipment. Pulse rounds sizzled through the air, impacting against metal and composite materials with sharp cracks. Suppressing fire, O'Brien ordered, returning fire with controlled bursts while assessing the situation. The extraction team was well-positioned, but they were also trapped. The only exit from the containment deck was the door O'Brien's team now controlled. Unless, Trisco, check the emergency evac systems. O'Brien called above the gunfire. His instincts were screaming that these professionals wouldn't have cornered themselves without an escape route. Trisco maneuvered to a status panel, checking the ship's systems. Captain, the emergency medical evacuation pod has been primed for launch. That explained it. The containment deck included a small evacuation system, essentially a self-contained medical escape pod that could be jettisoned in case of catastrophic ship failure. Normally used to ensure the survival of high-value prisoners or critically wounded personnel, it now represented the extraction team's exit strategy. Had the advantage of righteous fury. This was his ship, his crew that had been attacked, his mission that had been compromised. Each punch he landed carried the weight of that violation. Across the room, Vorta and Trisco efficiently neutralized the remaining operatives. One made a desperate lunge for Tarkos, only to be intercepted by Trisco's massive form. The sergeant lifted the man bodily and slammed him into a bulkhead with enough force to dent the metal. O'Brien's opponent, realizing the fight was lost, made a final desperate move. His hand darted to his belt, withdrawing not a weapon, but a small device with a blinking red light. Dead man's switch, the operative gasped through bloodied teeth. Let me go or this whole deck blows. O'Brien froze momentarily. Then a cold smile crossed his face. You're bluffing. You wouldn't risk killing Tarkos. That's why you're here. Uncertainty flickered in the operative's eyes, and in that moment of hesitation, O'Brien struck. A precise blow to the man's throat collapsed his windpipe, and a follow-up strike to the temple rendered him unconscious. O'Brien quickly secured the device, examining it with caution. It wasn't an explosive detonator at all, but a communications relay, likely intended to signal an extraction vessel waiting nearby. All hostiles neutralized, Vorta reported, surveying the containment deck. 2 Alliance security personnel injured, none critical. O'Brien nodded, then approached Admiral Tarkos, who observed the aftermath with clinical detachment. Admiral, it seems you remain in Alliance custody. Tarkos inclined his head slightly. So, it would appear, Captain O'Brien. I must say, your reputation for timely interventions is well-deserved. You don't seem particularly disappointed that your rescue failed, O'Brien noted, studying the Admiral's composed features. A thin smile crossed Tarkos' face. Let's just say that not all hegemony factions share the same vision for the future. The zealots who organized this extraction represent a philosophy I find increasingly problematic. Before O'Brien could probe further, his comm unit activated. Captain, Zuna's voice came through, tension evident even through the static. We've detected a ship decoupling from the ventral emergency airlock. Running dark, no transponder. Their extraction vessel, O'Brien realized. Can you disable it? Station weapons are tracking, but they're using the Titanus as cover. If they reach minimum safe distance for FDL jump. Understood. O'Brien turned to Trisco. Sergeant, get to auxiliary control. See if you can restore weapons systems. Trisco nodded and sprinted from the containment deck. O'Brien knew it was likely a futile effort. Restoring power to the weapons grid would take time they didn't have. They will escape, Tarkos observed calmly. This particular cell operates with contingency upon contingency. One might almost admire their thoroughness. O'Brien studied the Admiral with narrowed eyes. You know more about them than you share with Alliance intelligence. Perhaps, Tarkos acknowledged. Perhaps now would be an appropriate time to consider expanding our discussions. Before O'Brien could respond, Zuna's voice came through again. Contact has achieved FTL jump capability. They're gone, Captain. O'Brien's jaw tightened momentarily. Then he exhaled slowly. They had prevented the primary objective. Tarkos remained in Alliance custody. But the escape of the extraction team meant this wasn't over. Secure the Admiral. He ordered the remaining security personnel. And get medical teams down here for the wounded. As the containment deck bustled with activity, O'Brien's comm unit activated once more. Captain, Zuna's voice came through, calmer now. Bridge team reports your skeleton crew is alive, stunned and restrained, but otherwise unharmed. Relief washed through O'Brien. Good news, at least. Have medical check them thoroughly for any unexpected surprises. Already ordered, Zuna confirmed. The station is standing down from full alert status. Reactor systems are fully stabilized, and repair teams have contained all damage. We were lucky. O'Brien glanced at Tarkos, who observed the activity around him with the detached interest of a chess master watching pieces move across a board. Luck had nothing to do with it, Commander, O'Brien replied. We'll debrief in 1 hour. There's a lot to unpack here. Understood. Wolf out. Vorta approached, having completed securing the prisoners and treating the wounded. Captain, preliminary analysis of the extraction team's equipment confirms Vega's information. These are not standard hegemony operatives. How so? She held up a small insignia recovered from one of the unconscious men, a stylized human hand grasping a star, surrounded by what appear to be flames. The purity of form emblem, she explained. I've seen this only once before during the Kalidasa conflict. A fringe group of human supremacists who believe the future of humanity lies in isolation from and eventually domination of all alien species. O'Brien took the emblem, studying it grimly. And now they've graduated from fringe group to organized military faction with enough resources to mount operations like this. It would appear so, Vorta agreed, her expression carefully neutral. As a non-human serving with the Terran fleet, the implications of such a group gaining power were particularly concerning for her. O'Brien noted her restraint and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We've faced fanatics before, Lieutenant. These won't be the last. No, she agreed with a small smile. But they're becoming more creative. Trisco returned, his expression a mixture of frustration and resignation. Auxiliary systems are a mess, Captain. They did a thorough job disabling our offensive capabilities. Engineering estimates at least 12 hours to restore weapons functionality. Add it to the list, O'Brien sighed. So much for their 72-hour liberty. Let's get the Admiral back to secure containment on the station, then assess the full damage to the Titanus. As they prepared to move Tarkos, the Admiral spoke again, his voice pitched for O'Brien's ears alone. Captain, I believe we have mutual interests regarding this Purity faction. When you're ready to continue our conversation, I have information that might prove illuminating. O'Brien met the man's calculating gaze. We'll talk, Admiral. Count on it. For hours later, O'Brien stood in the observation lounge of Solaris Bastion, looking out at the stars. His injured arm throbbed dully. He had finally accepted painkillers, though less than Dr. Patel had recommended. The events of the day replayed in his mind as he tried to piece together the larger picture. The door slid open behind him, and Commander Wolf entered. She had changed from her combat uniform into standard duty attire, though the weariness in her eyes spoke of the day's toll. Thought I might find you here, she said, moving to stand beside him at the viewport. With no one else present, she allowed herself to stand closer than protocol would normally dictate. Old habit, O'Brien admitted. The stars help me think. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, watching the slow rotation of the station bring new constellations into view. Security has finished processing the saboteurs and extraction team, Zuna finally said. 17 individuals total from various backgrounds. Some ex-military, some mercenaries, a few true believers in the Purity cause. And Vega, cooperating as promised. His information checks out so far. She hesitated, then added, he claims this was just the opening move, that the Purity faction is planning something much larger. O'Brien nodded slowly. Tarkos hinted at the same thing. I think our VIP Admiral may not be as loyal to the hegemony as we assumed, or at least not to all factions within it. You trust him? Zuna asked, surprise evident in her voice. Trust is a strong word, O'Brien replied with a wry smile. Let's say I believe he has his own agenda, and for the moment, it aligns with our interests in containing this purity of form group. Zuna considered this, then nodded. Alliance intelligence will want to re-evaluate his status in light of today's events. They're welcome to try. Tarkos will reveal exactly what serves his purposes, nothing more. O'Brien turned to face her directly. What's the status of the Titanus? Repairs are underway. Chief Engineer Kosov estimates she'll be space-worthy in 36 hours, though some systems will require more extensive work at a proper shipyard. O'Brien grimaced. So much for our shore leave. Actually, Zunis said, a hint of mischief entering her expression. I've received updated orders from Alliance Command. In light of the attempted sabotage and extraction operation, they've extended the Titanus crew's liberty period to a full 7 days, while the ship undergoes comprehensive security, screening, and repairs. O'Brien's eyebrows rose in surprise. 7 days? That's unusually generous of command. They were impressed by how quickly we contain the threat, Zuna explained. And there's strategic value in appearing unfazed by the attempt. Business as usual, with appropriate precautions, of course. Of course, O'Brien agreed, a slow smile spreading across his face. So we have some time after all. We do, Zuna confirmed, allowing her professional demeanor to soften further. Though I suspect neither of us is good at taking time off, even when ordered to. O'Brien chuckled. True enough, but perhaps we could make an effort. Starting with dinner? I hear the officers' mess has actual, non-synthesized food tonight. I might be persuaded, Zuna replied with a smile. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of Vorta and Trisco, both looking significantly more refreshed after a few hours of rest and medical treatment. Captain, Commander, Vorta greeted them with a formal nod. We've completed the preliminary security assessment of the Titanus. No additional sabotage devices were found. Good work, O'Brien acknowledged. Both of you performed admirably today. Trisco allowed himself a rare grin. Just another day serving on the Titanus, sir. Though I still plan to find that glass of Highland whiskey I was promised. I believe that could be arranged, Sergeant, Zunas said. In fact, consider that an order. You've earned it. Yes, ma'am, Trisco replied, his grin widening. Vorta seemed less at ease, her posture still formal despite the relaxed atmosphere. O'Brien had noticed this tendency before. In moments of downtime, she often seemed unsure of her place. You too, Lieutenant, he said directly to her. Take some actual rest. That's an order. I will attempt to comply, Captain, she responded with what passed for humor in her typically reserved manner. Though I confess Terran concepts of relaxation remain somewhat alien to me. Perhaps Sergeant Trisco can provide some cultural instruction in that regard, O'Brien suggested. Trisco nodded seriously. I consider it my patriotic duty to demonstrate proper shore leave protocols, Lieutenant. First lesson begins at 2,000 hours in the recreation deck lounge. A subtle shift in Vorta's expression, the Khazari equivalent of amusement, crossed her features. I shall report promptly for this important cultural training, Sergeant. As the two departed, O'Brien turned back to Zuna. They did well today. The whole crew did. They follow your example, Zuna said simply. You've built something special on that ship, James. A true team that transcends species and backgrounds. O'Brien shook his head slightly. They build it themselves. I just try not to get in their way. The station's intercom activated one more time. Attention, all personnel. Environmental systems now operating at optimal levels in all sectors. Temperature regulation fully restored. Repair crews are standing down to standard rotation. Zuna's hand found O'Brien's, their fingers intertwining briefly. Temperatures have stabilized, she observed with a meaningful glance. In the station, perhaps, O'Brien replied, returning her gaze with equal meaning. But I suspect some may still be rising elsewhere. Her smile confirmed his assessment. 7 days is a long time, Captain. Not nearly long enough, Commander, he countered. But we'll make the most of it. As they left the observation lounge together, O'Brien knew that the danger hadn't passed, merely paused. The Purity faction would strike again, perhaps soon. Admiral Tarkos remained a dangerous chess piece on an increasingly complex board. The hegemony, the alliance, and now this new player were moving toward a confrontation that would likely dwarf today's events. But for now, for these stolen moments of peace, he would focus on what was directly before him. The ship would be repaired. His crew would rest and recover. And tomorrow would bring challenges enough of its own. Temperatures may be rising, he said quietly to himself as they walked toward the future. But so is our resolve. And in the vast darkness of space surrounding Solaris Bastion, distant stars burned with ancient fire, indifferent to the conflicts of the beings who sailed among them, yet somehow bearing witness to their indomitable spirit, human and alien alike, as they faced the gathering storm together.